This is a new speaker. It's a two-way speaker, comes in at $800. Is it going to replace my favorite bookshelf speaker from Q Acoustics at $900? Does it remind me of a B&W speaker, but it doesn't suck? Spoiler, yes it does. But you're gonna have to watch this video to find out if it's better than my favorite speaker at the price point. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, maybe through your new Cheap Audio Man coffee mug, which is available for purchase in the description. And let's talk about the new PSB Imagine B50. All right, we have a lot to cover. I listened to all of the songs actually through YouTube, which was going into my Weem Ultra. I'll tell you a little bit about that later and how I improved upon the sound, but I was using the internet. Do you use the internet like I do? Well, if you do, then you know that there's people trying to steal your money. That's why NordVPN is here to help you. The coolest thing about NordVPN is, well, it's super easy. And with just one click, you can be safer on the internet. Are you traveling out of the country, but you still need to watch the Real Housewives of Duluth, Minnesota? Well, even if you're in a country that's locked out from that high quality programming, you don't need to worry about it because you can use NordVPN to make sure you never miss another episode of the Real Housewives of Duluth, Minnesota. NordVPN also has Threat Protection Pro that protects you from malware and fake stores. They mimic real stores, looks legit, and they try to entice you with sweet, crazy deals. But it's not a deal because they'll process the credit card payment and send you nothing. And regular VPNs won't protect you from that. You just have to enable Threat Protection Pro on NordVPN. However, if you don't have NordVPN, it's super easy. Go to nordvpn.com/cheapaudioman, and if you sign up for 2 years, you get 4 extra months. It's risk-free because NordVPN gives you a 30-day money-back guarantee. NordVPN also has a dark web monitor. It's a scary place out there on the dark web, and they'll let you know if they find your information being sold by criminals. Check out nordvpn.com/cheapaudioman. Sign up today. If you sign up for 2 years, you get 4 months extra. Use the Threat Protection Pro. Use the dark web monitoring. Watch Real Housewives of Duluth, Minnesota when you're in any other country. Thank you, NordVPN, for sponsoring today's video. Their sensitivity is 85 dB, and there's definitely a difference between the sensitivity on the PSBs and the sensitivity on the Q Acoustics 5020, which have a stated sensitivity of 87.9 dB, if memory serves correctly. They were noticeably not as loud at the same power level, which makes sense. Did you know that for every 3 dB of change in sensitivity, it takes twice the amount of power? So if I'm trying to drive these at the same loudness as the Q Acoustics, it takes twice as much power. Fun fact. Frequency, stated frequency response, 45 up to 23,000 hertz. This is a small speaker. It's inverted. Remember in Top Gun? That was inverted. And then it has a rear port, speaker binding posts, so you can buy wire or buy amp them if you want to. They claim listening room sensitivity of 87 dB, but that would really only be 1 dB difference between the Q Acoustics and this, and there's way more difference than that. Nominal impedance 8 ohms, the minimum 4 ohms. Recommended amplifier power 20 to 150. I had these hooked up to the Advanced Paris A10 Classic. It's got a 1-inch titanium dome tweeter, 5 1/4-inch woofer, crossed over at 2200 hertz. This one is a Q Acoustics 5020. Comes in at $900, $100 more. And it's a lot heavier than the PSB. PSB are 11.3 pounds a piece. The Qs are coming in at 15.4 pounds a piece. They're a little bit bigger. Has a 5-inch C3 continuous curved cone woofer. The weird thing is the woofer looks bigger on the Q Acoustics than it does on the PSB, and supposedly the PSB has it. Let's just measure it. Now, oh my God, did I just put my thumb through it? I don't think so. I'm gonna put my thumb through this woofer. There are different ways that, like, if you're just looking at the size of the woofer, sometimes, I don't know, I would say there's a loophole. There's different ways to measure woofers, which doesn't make any sense to me. So this is spot on 5 inches from the edge of the surround to the edge of the surround. Man, this is a lot lighter. See? There we go. I knew it didn't look as big. This one is 4.5 inches from the edge of the surround to the edge of the surround. There's some weird way to measure woofers, because I remember I made this comment early on in a video about ELAC speakers, the debut. I remember Andrew Jones actually commented on that. He told me why I was wrong. But the PSB woofer is smaller than the Q Acoustics woofer. I don't care what loophole you're using. Build quality. The PSB Imagine B50 is built much better than the previous generation PSB Imagine XB, which I really like that speaker. But this one has a much better finish than that one had. This looks to be kind of like a painted finish. The driver surrounds are also, they have a little beauty ring in there. Looks much better. The waveguide on the tweeter in the Imagine XB series was rubber, and it just didn't look good. One of the criticisms I have about PSB speakers is they always feel cheaply made when you compare it to another speaker at the same price. This one, not bad. The binding posts, though, are way cheaper feeling than the binding posts on the Q Acoustics. The Q Acoustics has a vinyl wrap, but from like an aesthetic standpoint, it's got that cool reflective front baffle. Which one you like is up to you, but this is built a lot better than the previous generation. However, this is also $200 more than the previous generation. I don't love the binding posts. I told you I was going to tell you about the setup. Apple TV going into, I can't remember what TV I have. HDMI ARC going into initially the Advanced Paris A10 Classic. I didn't love the sound, so I went HDMI ARC out of the TV into the Weem Ultra. Weem Ultra digital optical output into the Advanced Paris A10 Classic's internal DAC. Better, but I wanted to see how far I could take it. Optical output of the Weem into the optical input of the Gishelli Labs Daisy RCA single-ended from the Daisy into an analog input on the A10 Classic. But I wanted it to be better. HDMI input into the Weem Ultra, USB output out of the Weem Ultra into my little hi-fi hack, the $60 SMSL. I can't remember. I think it's PO100. And then optical out of that into the Gishelli Labs Daisy, and then single-ended RCA out of the Daisy into the Advanced Paris A10 Classic. That was a mouthful, but that was also the best sounding results that I got. And it was just kind of an incremental improvement on clarity. Not necessarily dynamics, but a lot of clarity and then some spatial cues. Instrument separation too. And I think that methodology is going to apply, not just because I had a Daisy DAC, but any external DAC. Talked about the differences in sensitivity, talked about the differences in weight, talked about the differences in woofer size. So let's talk about how it sounds. I am obsessed with this song. If you follow the channel, you may have heard this already, but it is Sarah Bareilles' cover of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road with some symphony. It's so good. It's so addictive. I have probably listened to it over 100 times. The biggest, quickest difference I heard between these speakers is that the 5020s were more sibilant than the PSB Imagine B50s. At the 1 minute 17 second mark, where she says, or where she sings, the dogs of society. So the S is more sibilant. Not super sibilant, not super distracting, but it was definitely there. And when she said dogs of society, the S or the Z at the end of dogs was also sibilant. But the trade-off was her voice was a lot airier, a lot more articulate. There was a lot more layers to her voice. The PSB just didn't have the resolution. And I pulled out my real-time analyzer, which incidentally is called Decibel X. It's a free download, but you're gonna get a bunch of ads in there. It'll use the mic in your phone to tell you what SPL is, as well as a real-time analyzer. So when something happens at a point in a song, you can look at that and see what frequency it's happening at. So the sibilance was happening between 4 and 8K, which means there's either a reduction on the PSB speakers or a bump on the Q. Either way, I kind of like that sound. It may have to do with my hearing because maybe I'm deficient in that area. Listen, I know I'm deficient in many areas, but my hearing may be deficient between 4 and 8K. At 3:43 on that track or video, the symphony stops and it's just her voice. At 3:43, the symphony stops and it's just her voice. And I don't know what it is about that part. She just seems like vulnerable, innocent, kind of hurt, and the delicate details are 100% on display. And when she says goodbye at that part, drop the mic. The PSBs didn't have the definition, the clarity, or the reverb, but there's also something going on in the mid-range around 2800 hertz, so 2000 hertz, where things are pushed forward. So there is a part where her voice just kind of seems forward, and there's a little breakdown in the cohesiveness of the mid-range. And I wrote down where she hit, "Can't plant me in your penthouse." You could definitely hear an emphasis and a bit of breakdown in the mid-range balance. But sibilance was basically non-existent on the PSB Imagine B50s. So if you hate sibilance, then the PSB is going to be the speaker for you. If you want a little bit more clarity, instrument separation, a little bit better mid-range coherence, then the Q Acoustics 5020 is the speaker for you. There Will Be Time by Mumford & Sons featuring Baaba Maal. 50-second mark. Baaba Maal is hitting between 2K and 3K again, and it is definitely pushed forward on the PSBs. At the 37-second mark, there is more separation between vocal harmonies with the 5020s. And at 50 seconds and beyond, it's pleasant and moving and not overtly pushed forward on the Q Acoustics. And it sounds inline and natural. There's definitely a pop between 2 and 3K on the PSBs. And at the 2-minute 12-second mark, the song really gets up and goes. It's kind of like the payoff of the entire front end of that song. And there's a absolute ton going on. You know, it probably sounds like I'm giving the PSBs a hard time, but some people are going to like that bump between 2 and 3K. And that's why I alluded to it sounding like a B&W, but not sounding terrible. It's like a better version of B&W in every possible way. But 212 and beyond, the 5020s were just way more cohesive, balanced. Everything seemed in line, especially Baaba Maal's voice when he really went up. And at louder volumes above 80 dB, 85 dB, I can see the speaker, the PSB speaker, getting a bit fatiguing. Korn, Slipknot, live in London. It was a cover of The Triumphant Sabotage by the Beastie Boys. That song is so intense. And even if you don't like Korn or Slipknot, it's a fun track to listen to. You should really try it. At the beginning of the song, the guitar goes boom, goes way down, and it repeats itself a few times. The weight of that part of the song was way better on the PSBs. They have a low frequency roll off into the 40s, which I kind of find hard to believe, but maybe it's true because they did present that song in a meatier, I think more appropriate fashion. With the Q Acoustics on that song, I felt like I was getting the middle and the top part. I didn't really feel like I was getting any of the bottom part. And the PSBs definitely were giving me the bottom part. However, again, in that vocal region, anything north of 2K seemed to push forward. And Corey Taylor was doing all of the vocals on that song. So most of his vocals were lower than that 2K, but when he would go up at all, it would really lean forward quickly. And finally,
Mr. Wilson.
Slipknot's live version of the Heretic Anthem was done at Download in 2019. 231, there is a drum solo, and it was way better on the PSBs. You got a lot more going on in the amount of bass that it's presenting to you, the PSBs. And it does a pretty good job as far as clarity and separation, so it's fast bass. And that's the one song that I thought was better across the board with the PSBs. It's a bit of a departure from the previous generation Imagine series from PSB. That was a warmer speaker, reminded me a lot of ELAC debuts, the ELAC debut reference. With the titanium dome tweeter, I can see what they're doing here. They're trying to get more exciting, especially in the mid-range, a little bit of the top end too. But that top end boost doesn't really translate well. I thought the Q acoustics were much better post 4K, north of 4K. However, now I need to preface this that I hear mid-range frequencies more intensely than other people hear them because of the design of my ear. I actually learned this at the Florida Audio Show. I did this little test where the entirety of my mid-range was up. So I hear mid-range 3 to 6 dB louder than other people hear mid-range. And that's probably why I'm so sensitive to that upper mid-range bump. But you may not be. And I don't like KEF speakers. I don't really like B&W speakers. I don't like some Klipsch speakers. And what those speakers all have in common is a rise in the upper mid-range. Now, obviously, all of these companies are still in business and people buy their speakers. So just because I don't care for it doesn't mean that you won't love it. But for my taste, I think the only place that the PSBs are beating or bettering the Q acoustics, again, in my opinion, is on the bottom end. There's more of it. It's more powerful. And if you don't have a subwoofer, then the PSBs are gonna present like a bigger speaker because, well, they just have more bass. I don't think there's nearly as much mid-range cohesiveness and balance on the PSBs than the Q acoustics. I don't think there is as much air on the PSBs as on the 5020s. I think there's definitely a noticeable handoff between the woofer and the tweeter when it comes to the entirety of that mid-range presentation. It's not a bad speaker at all. I think a lot of people are gonna like it, but when a track comes on that I really like, I like to turn it up around 80 to 85 dB, and the forward push of the upper mid-range was just too much for me at louder volumes. At lower volumes, it's okay, but because of that wonky handoff between the woofer and the tweeter, if you're watching television, vocals are gonna sound different. Female voices come in pretty clean. Some male voices on television and movies come in a little bit muffled. Pretty fun on some tracks. I think metal is marginally better on the PSBs because you get that weight of the electric guitars. I do feel like at $800 they're a bit overpriced though. There's not really anything in the price range below them that has a similar vibe. So if you're looking for that vibe, maybe look hard at the PSB Imagine B50s. If you want to know a little bit more about the Q Acoustics 5020, I will put that video right up here. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen, maybe through your new PSB Imagine B50s or Q Acoustics 5020s. And fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.